Recruitment. Where did the girls come from? How did they hear about this school? School. And Northern Now, our next one you might have heard of. Her name was Marie Brush Moon. Marie Moon. She'd come to this country when she was about 5 years old from Bohemia and grew up in the old Mission Peninsula. She was educated at Columbia University and also studied with Dr. Kellogg in Battle Creek. She was chief dietitian and superintendent of the food service at both hospitals for 33 years, from 1915 to 1948. She taught the students about diets and the relationship of diet to disease. Oh, this is a cute quote. The Record Eagle noted her retirement on July 28th, 1948, in part it states, and I quote, upon retirement, Mrs. Moon, who has resided at the hospital for a number of years, will live at her home, 310 North Spruce Street. It would be hard to find such dedication today, for sure. Oh, the curriculum. Initially, the training school was of 2 years duration. It was lengthened to a 3-year program in 1917, so there was no graduation class that year. Generally, the hospital-based programs emphasize clinical experience along with the more formal studies. Now, I show this picture. I call this duties more domestic than professional. And I don't know, when I moved here, there was a fellow on the radio with the last name of Dumbrill. I don't know if anybody recognizes that name, sounds familiar. Well, this on the left is Alice Dumbrill, and she graduated, I can't remember what class, but this picture is taken about 1914. And one thing that I found very interesting about her was that when she went to the school, and it was early in the beginning of the school, she had only 1 year of high school. She's accepted in the School of Nursing with 1 year of high school. I can't imagine. By the end of the program, the high schools here in the high school here in Traverse City actually had a chemistry program for students considering going into the nursing profession. So that just shows a little bit of how things had advanced from 1 year of high school to, special programs in chemistry. But I thought that was very cute. Look, one looks like she's doing laundry, and the one on the left looks like she's mopping the cement floor, whatever. Okay. Now. Okay, here's a picture of girls and a supervisor behind them at a clinical experience. I just wanted you to notice how several of them have keys attached to chains at their waists. And there was a lot of locking of doors in the early psychiatric hospitals, general doors, room doors, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The classes these students would have taken in the first year would have been fundamentals of nursing, nursing history, anatomy and physiology, medical ethics, pharmacology, microbiology, and nutrition. And here we are with the nutrition class. And Mrs. Moon, that I mentioned before, is the lady standing in front of the blackboard teaching. I don't know if they're preparing food or if they're learning about food, but they're doing something to do with food anyway. And that's in the diet kitchen. They would also have experience in the operating room. And here we are. The one on the left is this nursing, the RN supervisor, and the two girls on the right are student nurses getting out their operating room experience. They would also be getting some experience in pediatrics in the nursery. They would also get expanded experiences on the medical and surgical floors as well. The third year girls found obtaining psychiatric would be found having their psychiatric experience at the state hospital. And these gals that I interviewed, they still thought about the patients that they had met and taken care of during their clinical years at the hospital. It did not leave with the end of their studies. They also talked about the various treatments that were going on when they were students at the hospital: insulin therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, hydrotherapy, and heat therapy, some of which are not used any longer. During the final year, the third year, once they had 3 years, they frequently went off to affiliations. And one popular place was Detroit Women's Hospital for their OB/GYN experience, and the infectious diseases at Herman Kiefer Hospital. And I actually went to Herman Kiefer Hospital when I was a student nurse too. It's quite an interesting place. Now, one of the nurses, Fran Fall Beatty, class of 43. She thought it was important to mention how the use of hospital supplies and equipment has changed since the early 40s when she was a student. It was not a disposable society in those days. Equipment used for patient care, such as bedpans, wash basins, urinals, and emesis basins, were cleaned, sterilized, and used again and again with no untoward effect. Needless to say, there was significantly less solid waste problems in those days. Here is Marion Wygand, on the student and on the right in this picture. In 1926, she graduated and went on to become a nurse anesthetist. Here's a study picture. Despite all the classes and long clinicals our students were exposed to, they had to find time to study along the way. This picture was taken in 1919, and I find it very interesting. Number one, that they're crammed up together. Number two, that they're in their nurses' outfits and their hats. And it seems to me you'd like to be stripping down to some of that stuff when you're studying, but they were very professional, even in their study habits, apparently. Okay, the students and student life. Oh, here's the picture of the guys. While nursing has traditionally been a woman's profession, the first 6 graduating classes of the school had male graduates. And you can see in this picture that there's quite a few men there. And likely they were attendants in the male wards, because some of the patients, before medications that we have available today, the patients could become rather unruly, and it was better to have some male attendants that could take care of things better than a little lady could. So I think probably they observed who was functioning well and offered them a position in the nursing program. They dressed as men, I think. I don't have any pictures of them. Yeah, you can see here the girls are all dressed, the women, I call them girls all the time. They're all dressed in nurses' whites, and the men are dressed in suits. And that every picture I've ever seen, that's how they were dressed, even on the floor. I don't, I'm sure towards the end of the time when the school closed, the answer would be yes. But in the beginning, I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that. Oh, it definitely, definitely, especially when you're washing bedpans and urinals. Yes. I was interested in looking at the ethnicity of the students to see where they had come from. And most of the families were from Germany, British Isles, Canada, and the Netherlands. I was surprised by the Netherlands. There was also representation from Romania, Bohemia, Ireland, Italy, Poland, and Austria. So it was quite a melting pot. The majority of students were from farming families whose parents or grandparents had immigrated to this country. But there were a couple of cases where the student was the actual immigrant. One was Emma Thum, THUM, class of 12, and Wilhelmina Krohn-Graylich, class of 15. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Now our next picture, my favorite nurse again, here's Bertha Orcott again. Can you recognize her on the right? Several of the students were teachers before becoming nurses. And here's Bertha as a teacher at South Mabel School in 1914. And there was one story of a nurse, a student nurse, who had planned to become a teacher. And she was all set up, and I think it was Manitou Island or someplace like that, that she had been assigned to go to. And then she started hearing rumors that those students over there were a rough bunch. And she got scared. And a couple of her girlfriends were going to the nursing school. So she decided to go to the nursing school instead. And she ended up becoming a nurse. But I thought it was interesting that the rumors flew even back in those days. Okay. Accommodations. Here we see our nurses still dressed in their uniforms and caps with chains around their waist in what appears to be a room where they would be staying. I don't know what to say about it. When we get done, I've got some quotes of actual situations where people found themselves. Just remember this picture where they're all dressed nicely. They have a nice room with pictures up and nice curtains and everything. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, probably. Okay. Okay, here's some ladies out for a stroll. Um, they, girls seem to enjoy a lot of outdoor activities, and the favorite thing was picnics. And this is about 1908, and it's a picnic on East Bay. Anna Thorson Newman, class of 10, is in the back row, third from the left. And right in front of her is her husband, George. And notice George is at the picnic in a suit too. So they seem, maybe that's the only outfit they had. I don't know. But her sister, uh, who also graduated from the school, Julia, class of 11, and she's in the front row, third from right. And Julia is holding the Newman's daughter, Georgia. And there were stories about how when mother was assigned to work at the hospital, she frequently would bring Georgia with her, and the patients loved pushing her up and down the hallways of the hospital and entertaining her. And of course, she loved it too. That certainly would not be tolerated today. Now here we have a picture of the class of 1916 dressed for their graduation picnic. And look at their cute hats. And they've got nice uniforms and little scarves around. They look so nice. Well, that's going to change real quick. Our final picnic picture is from a nurse's picnic held at Bellows Long Lake Cottage for Doretta Lutman, class of 39, who is leaving for military service. Please note how formal attire from 1908 has become very casual by 1942. And I love the big bow on the one lady's hat, pretty fancy. Now, this next picture is a bit of a mystery. This came from the album that Alice Dumbrill's things came from, and it was marked on it, class play. And Alice is in the picture. She's on the far right in the back, and it was taken in 1915. And I thought this might have been a standing tradition for the students, but none of the ones I interviewed had any recollection of anything like that. Bernice Berg Drake recalled that her class prepared a program of songs, poetry, and comedy skits for the Traverse City District Nurses Association in their senior year, but no class play. The girls maintain lifelong friendships that crossed even class lines. This picture shows Velma Cooper, 36, Pasco, 37, Wilhelm, 36, and Patterson, 38, visiting Gaylord for the day in 1938. They look pretty cute too with their cute little hats. I was very impressed by the warmth between the nurses. And here we show buddies Blanche Spreeman, class of 36, and Evelyn Pasco, class of 37 on the left. Julia Leo, class of 10, and Julia Thorson, class of 11, about 1920, when they were living in the Detroit area. These girls were so close, they even had a double wedding. Family affair. One thing I did notice when I was looking through the lists was that the names were frequently repeated. And there were some families that had an awful lot of kids that went to this school. Now I say this name, I'm not German, and I say this name wrong all the time. I pronounce it Grosser, Groesser. I know that's not right because I've been corrected before, but I don't know what is right. But anyway, this is two sisters, Hazel Helen and Edna Hulda, and they came from a large German farming family in Leelanau County. And a younger sister, Margaret Elizabeth, also attended the school and graduated in 1928. So they were pretty prolific. Now, these are the Brakels. And they were also from a farming family, but from Blair Township in Grand Traverse County. Ruth graduated in 1937 and Carmen in 1940. And Leela Stites also graduated. She's on the right, and she is their first cousin. Now, these are the Lessards. The Lessards were a French-Canadian family who were farming in Antrim County, and sisters Florence and Marcia graduated in 1943. Their niece Marjorie graduated with class in 1947. And the only Lessard that I know of from this area is the one that did the bird thing, injured birds. Did you ever? She was not. What? Oh, Lessard, yes, yes, that's the only connection I'd ever had with that. Okay. Oops. Love and marriage. In addition to family members attending the training school, research uncovered many instances of marriages between graduates. Graduates sometimes wed other employees at the hospital as well. There were several instances when nursing students introduced classmates to brothers, resulting in nuptials. Okay. This is the Batts-Lessard wedding. And I'm giving you this example here just to show you what it was like. The nursing class of 1947 had only 4 students: Marjorie Batts, Maxine Erickson, Marjorie Lessard, and Isla Odell. One day, these girls were preparing suture for the thyroid surgeries the next day. They began discussing the fact that they each had a brother in the military. On a whim, they prepared straws with the brother's name on each. Marjorie Batts drew the straw with Robert Lessard's name on it. They became pen pals and eventually married on June 20th, 1947 in Umpire. Marjorie's 3 attendants were her 3 classmates, and the ceremony was performed by Reverend Worth Tennant, who was married to a graduate from the School of Nursing also. So, Worth, W-I-R-T-H. Yes, yes, he was. He was very well known. Okay, next thing happens is graduation. After 3 years of intense study and prescribed experience, the students are ready for graduation. Unfortunately, this was the only picture I could find of a graduation. And it was in the Record Eagle in 1942. And Eileen Cortad Newman is the one that gave me the picture. And all the years of the graduations from this school, only once was there a female speaker, and only once did a woman give out the diplomas and class pins, which I found interesting, seeing how it, basically after the first few years, it was basically a school for women. And here we have Fran Fall dressed for her graduation ceremony in 1943. Here is the diploma. This is Marguerite Lucille Oberlin's 1933 diploma. You can see it's very official looking. Lots of signatures. In the 1940s, a separate baccalaureate service would be held, usually on the Sunday following graduation exercises. And I think this is the picture of some of the class of 1940 dressed for the service. And I just thought that their clothes were especially cute. The lady in the back on the left, second from the end, with it looks like a cowboy hat. Well, you would think that our girls were ready for a break, but unfortunately they didn't get one. They had one more huge hurdle to complete, and that was the dreaded state board examination. And anybody who's ever taken it knows it was dreaded. It was very scary. Okay. During the time the school was open, the girls had to travel to Detroit, Lansing, or Grand Rapids, depending on where the test was being offered that year. And here's some of the class of 1940 in Grand Rapids for the exam. After about 6 weeks of anxiety, the students would receive their results in the mail. And not everybody passed this test. Many people would have to repeat it. Here is Marjorie Lessard's first license. And once you receive that license, you could use the name of the initials RN after your name when charting, which indicated registered nurse. Things have really changed since the 1940s when our final students were graduating. Since 1994, the test is computerized and offered on a daily basis throughout the United States. Professional life. What did these girls do after they graduated? Did they contribute to the community? Did they get married and have a bunch of babies? What did they do? Well, let's just find out about that. They chose a lot of different career paths. Some worked for a short time and then did get married. Others worked as private duty nurses in hospitals and public health and for physicians in their offices. A few had careers in industry and as school nurses, and many served in the military. Private duty nursing. I was surprised to find out, even though I probably knew in the back of my head, that private duty nursing during the first years of formal nursing education in the America was the main form of nursing that took place, because there weren't hospitals. So you would get cases from other nurses, from hospitals, from physicians in their offices, and through nursing agencies. I thought I had died and gone to heaven when I talked to Tom Steffies one day, and he told me that he had his mother's case book from when she was a private duty nurse that showed her cases, how much she was earning, how many hours she was putting in. And I mean, I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. I felt so, this whole business was kind of like a scavenger hunt for me. I loved every minute of it. It was so much fun. But she was a private duty nurse for a lot of her career. The nurse went from case to case, usually living in the patient's sick room, and was expected to be available 24 hours a day. The wages were very low, and trust me, they were very low. Here we have Lois Steffies, 32 on the left, and Agnes Cortade Wilson on the right. They both as private duty nurses. And in one case, Agnes Wilson was the relief nurse for Lois Steffies. Okay, hospital nursing. After the 30s, hospital nursing replaced private duty nursing as the main form of employment for RNs. And the greatest number of nurses from the school worked at the state hospital or at Munson after graduation. Here we have Donna Garn, and she graduated in 1935. She became the assistant superintendent of nursing under Bertha Orcutt and had a long career in nursing. She is the one that wrote all the notes about the living, caring for the patients, unofficial, very unofficial reports of what it was truly like to work at the hospital. She was best known to the student nurses as the one to check to be sure they were in bed with lights out by 10 o'clock, unless they had a pass. And I'm hoping that we'll have time to review just a couple of her things at the end. Okay. On the left here, we have Naomi Hooker Neihart, class of 35, working at Munson in the 1960s. And on the right is Edith Hermel Hartley, class of 20, who had a long career at the state hospital. Okay. This slide shows Helen Kruppa Bugai on the left. Helen was a descendant of Bohemian immigrants. She graduated in 1938 and worked at Munson for a time. She eventually left nursing to partner with her husband in their dairy farm and orchards in Leelanau County. In 1960, she returned to nursing as a way to increase the cash income in order to make improvements on the farm and increase their holdings. This was not an uncommon story for the nurses to go back when things were not going well on the farm to try to get a new roof or something. Emma Schwinn in class of 12 returned to work at the state hospital during the Depression in order to get a new roof for their barn and to make equipment improvements on the farm. Now, the lady on the right, this is one of the most interesting cases I've ever heard of. And I didn't grow up in Traverse City, so I don't think this was a common thing that happened here. But that is Nina Caswell and her daughter Helen. Nina graduated in 1923 and worked as a private nurse at Munson. She married a man she met at Butterworth Hospital when she was doing an affiliation there in her third year of nursing school. Her husband became an attendant at the state hospital for 27 years. Nina's career lasted 35 years. They had 2 children whom they boarded out as they found they could improve their income by living on the hospital grounds themselves. I had never heard of anything like that before. That was new to me, but I had to include this in the book because I thought it was very interesting. A few other nurses chose other hospitals in which to work. And here's a picture of 4 nurses at the Boardman Valley Hospital: Frances Drennan, Frances Kruppa Rokas, Lois Lardy Steffies, and Dorothy Claypack Kruppa. Public health nursing was also a field in which some of the gals went into. Here is Sadie Wolf, who graduated in 1921. She worked as a public health nurse in Midland for 39 years and received numerous awards, culminating in being named Citizen of the Year in 1970. When presenting her plaque, Judge James Rood noted, when she began work in the Midland area, there were few street signs, few paved roads, and no house numbers. Only God and Sadie knew where everyone lived. Upon her retirement, Sadie recalled the circumstances of her employment with the health department. There had been 7 applicants for the position. She said she was chosen because, quote, they wanted someone who could drive around in the mud, and I was the only one who qualified. So, another interesting case was Doris Reed. She graduated in 1936 and was working at the Little Traverse Hospital in Petoskey. She and some of the other nurses met a patient who was a missionary from Kentucky, and he became ill while visiting family in Michigan. He told them about a nursing organization in Kentucky, which did public health work and midwifery. Doris decided she was going. She traveled to Kentucky and enrolled in the midwifery program of the Frontier Nursing Service. Her stories about nursing by horseback in the hills and hollers of Kentucky can be found in her book, Saddlebags Full of Memories. Family circumstances finally required that she return to Burt Lake and Sheboygan to care for her mother, and she became a public health nurse there for 20 years. In 1992, the health department dedicated its new building in Sheboygan as the Doris E. Reed Center, which is quite an honor. Office nursing. Many nurses chose office nursing as their career. The attractions are obvious. There's no weekends, there's no night shifts. And here we have Bernice Berg as the office nurse for Dr. Richard Thirlby in 1968. Finally, military nursing. World War I. On this slide, we have 2 of our graduates who served in the military during World War I. On the left is Julia Thorson. She's in the back row on the right-hand side. She served at Fort Dix, New Jersey from 1918 to 1990 and nursed the men returning from Europe and watched as they survived their wounds but died of influenza. On the right is Grace Stiglitz, who along with her sister Lila was a 1914 graduate. Both girls served in World War I. Grace was stationed at Camp Custer. The influenza epidemic hit the camp with a vengeance. For all you nurses, I want you to just think about this if you ever involved admitting a new patient to the floor. Example, on October 2nd, 1918, between the hours of 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m., 2 soldiers were being admitted to the hospital each minute. Each minute. The hospital was filled to capacity very rapidly, so the artillery sector was cleared for additional beds, and nurses were recruited from Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, and Ann Arbor. In total, 5,794 soldiers were diagnosed at Camp Custer, and 841 of them died. That brings us to World War II. Here on the left, we have Marjorie Batts and Marjorie Lessert, class of 1947, in their cadet nurse winter uniforms. On the right is Bernice Koch, class of 1946. She's modeling the summer uniform. This slide shows Marie Weaver, class of 32, and a friend in the U.S. Navy uniforms. And on the right are Carmen and Ruth Brakel in their U.S. Army uniforms. Sad note here, Ruth, the one on the right, she died at the age of 37 during training for overseas on the obstacle course. She had a leg injury from which she never recovered. And so she died quite young. Here we have pictures of Zetta Slater. I love that name, Zetta Slater. I think that's such a cool name. On the left, the girls are washing their hair in the field. In the picture on the right, she's in Italy, where she cared for Ernie Pyle, who called her Sunshine. On the left is Lieutenant Pauline Egler, on duty at Madigan General Hospital, Fort Lewis, Washington. On the right is Second Lieutenant Lorraine Cadieux, who served tours in South Carolina, Georgia, California, and England. Lorraine died very recently, and I was fortunate to be able to attend her funeral. And I was amazed by something that happened there that day. She had, an impressive career and was well known. And at the end of the funeral, 4 women came in dressed in white uniforms, nurses' caps, capes, white shoes and nylons, and they gave I don't even know what I would call a little discussion or a little prayer service regarding her being a nurse and what being a nurse meant. And everybody was absolutely blown away. The funeral was very nice, but that was the best part of the whole thing. It was really wonderful. And the women were not from Traverse City, but they're trying to get something like that going up here in Traverse City. Thought that was interesting. Okay. All right. Now, several nurses chose long-term military careers. Harriet Stevens became a lieutenant colonel, and Ruth Desautels became a lieutenant colonel. Marcia Lessard, who is shown in this picture, class of 43, retired as a full colonel, and her impressive military record can be found in the appendices of the book. Okay, the Alumni Association. It was founded in 1923 during a meeting of the Traverse City Nurses Club. The minutes of this meeting are also in the appendices. You can see it was pretty well attended group. This is their banquet held in 1973 on the 50th anniversary. And here we see Cora Lacey, class of 1909, receiving her 50-year pin at the 1959 meeting. This was a long-standing tradition for the group, but once they got older and the school was closing down, many of them chose, rather than to get a pin, to make a donation for the nursing program at NMC. This is a picture of the 1976 banquet. I think you can see that they were so proud of this banner that's being displayed in front of the window at the Elks Club. They were very proud of that. But, by 1996, as people moved away, aged, and died, there were only 32 members present for their annual banquet, and they voted to disband. The balance of the treasury was given to NMC for scholarships. Closure of the school. In 1947, an article in the Record Eagle reported that the nursing shortage was so severe that Munson Hospital was faced with closing one of its floors. Yet in that same year, the training school for nurses graduated its last class. This was perplexing. As the profession was maturing, there were movements to strengthen the educational portion of the nursing programs and place less emphasis on clinical experiences. Unfortunately, many hospitals had started nursing programs in order to get cheap help. They would put these girls right on the floors taking care of patients from the beginning without giving them a really good, they were trained, they weren't educated. So the state boards, including that of Michigan, strongly encouraged collaborative relationships with colleges and universities, and Traverse City had no such institution at the time. The school was pretty much forced to close. It did not cease all activity, however. It did still provide psychiatric training as an affiliation for students from outside of the area and different nursing programs. And it also started an LPN program, which is a much shorter, less intense program. And NMC, I believe 1951 is when it, am I right, Richard or Stephen? What, 1951 when NMC opened its nursing program? Yeah. Okay, so it was very close. It wasn't a long time that there was no education. It was very disconcerting for the graduates that I interviewed, and many took it with difficulty. And it must be said that all of those I interviewed felt that they had received a quality education that prepared them not only for a career, but for life's challenges as well. So that's about the story. And if anybody has, we're a little bit late, I don't know. Does anybody have any questions? I'd like to read, oh, yes?
And hold on 1 second, because Zoom is working now, so you talk in here. You have to talk in
Can't
here.
hear you. The training of the nurses before NMC opened was all at the regional psychiatric hospital, or was it also at Munson? When did they start? Well, the students at, you mean at this program? The Traverse City State Hospital Training School for Nurses, that basic training had been at Munson Hospital, but they would do a psychiatric affiliation. Done at the psychiatric hospital? No, that's why they got that first hospital in the beginning, because they needed to, they were probably trying to just use the infirmary, but, but no, it was in order to be affiliated with it had to be affiliated with a general hospital or get experiences in medical surgical nursing. In addition, they may have just used the infirmary in the early years when there weren't that many patients, but towards the end, it definitely had to be at Munson Hospital. Okay, I'm just going to read you a couple of things. One is a description of the patient accommodations. A few of the best rooms had the luxury of a wooden dresser. There were few and usually empty since the possessions were not, as a rule, kept by the patient. Typical bed linen was one bed pad about 4 by 4, 2 sheets, a pillowcase, and one black blanket, sometimes 2. The bedspread was carefully removed from the bed about 4 p.m. before the patient could enter her room to go to bed, and carried out and stacked with the other spreads neatly folded and put away. Then after the patient had left the room for the day, the bed was made and the spread put back on, and the door was locked. Most of these spreads wore well and were seldom, if ever, seen by the patient. So they basically were locked out of their rooms and had no bedspread. Now, these are just a couple of little things. You know, today we think we have it so hard. Graduate nurses in good standing with the director of nurses will be given an evening off for courting purposes, or 2 evenings a week if you go regularly to church. I thought that was cute. Any nurse who smokes, uses liquor in any form, gets her hair done in a beauty salon, or frequents dance halls will give the director of nurses good reason to suspect her worth, intentions, and integrity. And this is what I mean about, you know, back in the old days, they could get rid of you for just about anything. The nurse who performs her labors and serves her patients and doctors without fault for 5 years will be given an increase in pay of 5 cents a day, providing there are no hospital debts outstanding. So it was not an easy life necessarily. Oh, this is kind of, do we have time for one more, Stephen? Okay. This is called attic living. I do remember some things which took place in our living quarters, which were lots of fun and highly irregular, therefore top secret for many years. Now, this is obviously before they had the nurses' home. It looks like during those years, these student nurses were put all over the place in nooks and crannies throughout the hospital or other buildings. I was really sincere in being a good employee and also enjoyed my portion of humanity and its mischief along with all the others. At the time, we were living in the large attic over one of the big buildings. One end of the attic contained 2 sleeping rooms, 3 beds, a short hallway, and a very small bathroom. You reach these elegant quarters by way of an extremely narrow wooden stairway up 3 flights of stairs. The fire hazard was extreme in this area. The building was very old. The partition between our living quarters and the other end of the long attic was made of wood and dry as tinder. Rules were there could be no cooking appliances whatsoever. I don't think we were permitted a radio, and I'm not sure about our table lights. Right now, if I were to live up there, I wouldn't want any of these because of the very real danger. At that time, it didn't worry us much. There were 5 of us living there, and as a rule, we did not suffer from loneliness, needless to say. Besides that, in our rooms, we had all of the equipment we needed for cooking and serving complete dinners, doing this most secretly, and placing the largest, oldest attendant in a chair with her back against the door during the partaking of the meal, just before we ate. Although it was sacrilegious, I could remember it now. I think even God would see the humor in it. One day, we almost blew our fun time and possibly our jobs. One of the girls was popping popcorn in her electric corn popper. We heard the door open downstairs and assumed at once it was the assistant director of nurses who would have sealed our doom and probably our last paycheck without mercy. The girl grabbed the still connected popcorn popper and shoved it under a bed. I forgot who was that came up, but it was surely someone not very observing. The smell of hot popcorn was all about the place. And besides that, the popper under the bed kept on popping. That one almost got us. Oh, here's this one. I have to do this one. The other end of the attic was a lovely haven for bats, and they accumulated there by the hundreds or more. Every once in a while, a man would come in and kill as many as they could. This greatly disturbed this elderly attendant who roomed with us, and if she knew they were coming, she would go and catch as many as possible and take them away. One day she had caught a whole pint of live bats and had them in a ventilated pint jar on her dresser. One of the girls who was deathly afraid of bats came in the door. She was also always hungry. She took one look at the jar and said, "Oh, prunes." Opened the jar only to see the prunes practically fill our small quarters. I doubt if she ever ate another prune. There were bats everywhere. So you can see they had quite a time. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Thank you.